All right, welcome to Conspirinormal, everybody. We are back after a little bit of a break. I have Timothy Renner to thank for this guest that we have on tonight. I heard this gentleman talk about something on Strange Familiars that really intrigued me, and it was this thing called the Sheppton Mining Disaster. And this was something that happened in Pennsylvania in 1963, and something that I had never ever heard of until then, and looked into it after that, and have had the pleasure to read about it once again in the current book by this author, Maxim Furek, who we have on right now, Region Hoodoo. And we're happy to have him on Conspirinormal. Maxim, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Adam and Sirfield. Glad to be here. And yeah. So for the folks out there, hello, I'm Maxim Furek, and my book is Region Hoodoo. Glad to be on the podcast.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about your book, talk about Region Hoodoo, and we're going to talk about the Sheppton Mining Disaster, which is a part of that book. And I understand that there is a whole book that's just about the Sheppton Mining Disaster.
Yeah, that was how I got into this paranormal thing, how I stumbled into it. But yeah, my previous book is called Sheppton, The Myth, Miracle, and Music. And it talks about the 1963 Sheppton Mining Disaster that just has all kinds of elements of the paranormal. Mm-hmm. And so that was 2015 that came out.
Okay. Yeah. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. But before we do that, I want to talk about the title that you chose for this current book, Region Hoodoo. Why did you choose that title particularly? Well,
first of all, I wanted to do something, that promoted the paranormal aspects of the coal region and also, Pennsylvania. And I wanted to do for Pennsylvania what Stephen King's been doing for Maine, what some of the other authors are doing for New Orleans. And Pennsylvania has a history of paranormal events. Probably the most written about would be down in Lancaster with the hex signs and white witches and all that. But, I felt that, boy, there's so much more out there. I'm just amazed that there aren't more paranormal researchers and authors that are writing about what happened back home. So anyway, after the Sheppton mythology came out, and after it resonated, I seemed to have gotten an audience. I was invited to conferences and podcasts, and I thought, I'm going to just follow this up a little bit further. So Region Hoodoo. Hoodoo refers to something that could be both a blessing or a curse. And when we take a look at the miners, the trapped miners in Sheppton, I asked myself, why is it that two of the miners were rescued and they got the blessing, whereas the third miner got the curse? I mean, we don't even know what happened to him. Some people think he was cannibalized, but we don't know. So that was what hoodoo, represents to me.
Okay. And the Sheppton Mining Disaster is still a pretty significant part of this book. So there's a lot still that's about it if people want to find out about it. And what are kind of the basics of the Sheppton Mining Disaster? And also, too, people might be asking, how's a mining disaster figure in with the paranormal? Yeah. But there are some very paranormal aspects to this.
Yeah. Well, first of all, how did I get there? I was writing a book on the highest charting song that we had in northeastern Pennsylvania was in 1971. That was a song called Timothy. It was recorded by a group called The Boys. And Rupert Holmes, the Pina Colada Man, was an engineer for Scepter Records. He wanted to write a song that would get the Boys some notoriety and get them another record deal. So that was the plan. So he wrote the song about cannibalism in a mine. And all of a sudden, people started to put two and two together and say, wait a second, Timothy, the song seems to be a lot like the Sheppton Mine Disaster. Because in Sheppton, there were three men that were trapped for 2 weeks. They were trapped 330 feet underground. And after they were finally rescued, they only rescued 2 of them, and they wanted to know what happened to the 3rd miner. And some people believe that there was cannibalism involved, and that just reared its ugly head and took off. And to this day, there's people that still believe that, but it's unfounded, it's unsubstantiated, it's grotesque, but that urban legend, if you will, persists to this day. Mm-hmm. So I'm researching Sheppton, and all I wanted to do was write this rock mythology connecting the song with Sheppton. But as I'm researching Sheppton, I found out that it had very significant paranormal elements. It had elements of out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, and afterlife experiences. And what was really kind of crazy about that was that all of these things, I mean, you could say, okay, that they are paranormal and they fall into the realm of the supernatural. But with the Sheppton narrative, all of these things were vetted or validated by psychologists, psychiatrists, by Dr. Bruce Grayson from the University of Virginia, one of the leading authorities on near-death experiences, and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote the transformative book on death and dying. And she was down there in Virginia, and she believed that Sheppton represented a classic example of life after death.
So who were these 2 men that were trapped down there in the mine? Well, you said there were 3 men. 2 got out. One was never recovered, which kind of sparked some of the rumors.
Yeah, sure.
But who were the 2 men that were trapped down there, and how long were they trapped down there?
They were trapped down there for 2 weeks. What happened was it was on a Tuesday in August. It was August of 63, and the 3 guys were down at the bottom of the hole, the pit, 330 feet down, and they sent down the buggy. They filled it up with coal, sent it to the top. There was a guy named George Walker. He was the foreman up there. So he tipped the car. He was, I guess, the tipper foreman. Tipped it and sent it back down. On the way down, that's when the cave-in happened. And so there were thousands, maybe millions of tons of coal and rock and timber that came down, close to the miners. So they dove into these little monkey shafts. And Davy Fellon, who was 58, and Hank Throne, who was 28, were the ones who were finally extricated after 2 weeks. So they were the only ones. They never found the body of Louis Bova. They never found bones. They never found bloody clothing or anything. They never found any evidence of anything strange happening down there. So, and they went down and they checked, but there was no evidence. So, so again, the rumors persisted and linger and continue. Even Louis Bova's son, Johnny, believes that the possibility that they ate his father exists. And he's been interviewed countless times, and he's sticking to his story.
Yeah, but more than likely, probably he just was crushed. Probably when the collapse happened, that seems to be the more than likely explanation.
Well, here's what I think. I mean, and whenever I do my programs, there's always people that come up to me and they give me their idea, their theory of what happened to Louis Bova, and that's there's plenty of them. But I think what happened, I think you're right, Adam. I think that what happened was a mountain of coal and rock separated Fellon and Throne from Bova. They claimed that they spoke with him after the cave-in, and he said that his leg was broken, and they spoke with him for a while, and then his voice faded, and eventually they didn't have any contact. So that's what I think happened. I don't think that there was ever any cannibalism. And I'll tell you what, another thing too, I mean, being traumatized down there in a pit where there's no light, total darkness, right. crawling on your hands and knees like a dog, sucking in coal dust and dirt and water, horrible, sulfur water trickling down, all this stuff, and having no hope of rescue, which had to be the worst part of this ordeal. But I don't think those guys in that traumatized condition were hungry. I don't think they were hungry. I think food was the last thing that they were thinking about. And I think they were just adrenalized, They were just going on emotion, and I don't know. I mean, it had to be horrific to be down there.
From the surface, were they digging a hole that they could lower kind of like supplies down to them? Because they kind of knew where they were. Is that that's how I understood it? Is that true?
Well, what happened was the shaft opening where they went up and down, that was
Yeah.
totally blocked, so they couldn't do that. They felt that it would take something like 3 months maybe to remove all the debris.
Wow.
So that
Wow.
was just too long. So somebody thought that if they are alive, maybe they jumped into one of these monkey shafts and maybe they'd be there. So the plan was to take these drills and just drill, like I think it was a 3-inch or 6-inch hole down there to try to find them. And then if they could find them, then they would go and make that hole bigger. What happened was they had a drill device and they knew exactly where they wanted to go and start drilling. And the rig broke down before they got to that place. So somebody said, what the hell, let's just drill anyway. So they drilled anyway and they found them. So, that's part of that's part of the what? I mean, call that what you will, a
Yeah.
lucky
Interesting.
guess or, no, yeah, I think it was part of that whole Sheppton mythology, just a lot of weirdness.
Now, what there's some interesting things about it. I mean, you have I think it was Felon, I think that he was the older man, and then Throne, he was the younger one. And Felon he was Roman Catholic, but Throne was not.
Yeah. Pretty
But
much
there
an
were some interesting
agnostic, maybe. Yeah.
yeah, there were some interesting things that I mean, they're down there in this pit, and like you said, I mean, it's total darkness. So you've got like a lot of the sensory deprivation going on.
Right.
Um, they begin to see things down
Right.
there,
Hmm.
and and they both report seeing things. So, what kind of things were they seeing?
Well, first of all, you're right. They both reported seeing the same thing. They did that during separate interviews. And, they were polygraphed and tape recorded by psychiatrists and psychologists. So a lot of people, talk to them and interview them. But they saw the apparition of Pope John the 23rd. And Pope John the 23rd stayed with them for 2 weeks. He was in the mine. The interesting thing about Pope John the 23rd was that he had died in June of 63. Sheppton took place in August of 63. And when Pope John the 23rd was canonized in 2014, numerous Vatican scholars and academics came forward and said that, yes, Sheppton is one of the miracles that Pope John the 23rd performed. So again, it was it seemed to be a case of life after death. All three of these miracles of Pope John the 23rd happened after he had died. And a Roman Catholic nun that I talked about said that the reason for that is he died and went to heaven and got his power, his authority, and then came down and worked the miracle. So, that's the story. That's the Roman Catholic mythology. But the fact that, the Vatican and Vatican scholars got behind this, I mean, that's pretty amazing too. So it wasn't just a story. It wasn't just a story of two miners who saw something, but it was other people that said, yes, this is valid. This is sacrosanct. This is a miracle. And I mean, call it what you will. They felt that the vision of Pope John the 23rd saved their lives. He was just there in the background, just sort of giving them the feeling that they would be rescued, that they should be calm, that they were going to be rescued. And that was his MO, his modus operandi in the other miracles that he performed, that he would just be in the back of the room, with his arms folded, just, at peace. So,
And this was seen by both men. This was seen by by Felon, who was a Roman Catholic, and Throne, who was not. So it
yeah,
was seen by both men. Yeah.
yeah, which is a great story. I mean, what a classic story. I mean, somebody should do a documentary about this. But what happened was they finally got rescued, and they had helicopters there. So they took Throne over to the Hazleton General Hospital first, and then the second chopper, I think they had two choppers, took Davy Fellon over. And when they went there, now remember, this is 63, and there was a picture of the Pope. You know, a lot of these people here in Hazleton were Roman Catholic. And there was a picture of Pope John the 23rd. And Throne, who was not schooled in Catholicism or any kind of religious thing, he goes, Davy, that's him. That's the guy we saw down there. There's the stranger. Look, it's him. So Throne knew that that guy was Pope John the 23rd. You know, that was just a pretty amazing thing. So that was the one thing. The other thing, though, before they were pulled through that borehole, which had to be a horrific ordeal, before they went up, Fellon told Throne this. He said, Davy, keep your damn mouth shut. Don't tell them what we saw down here because they're going to think we're crazy. And so he sent him up the borehole, and as soon as Throne got there, and again, they had paparazzi back in 1963, just like they do today. And they started to interrogate him and say, you know, well, how was it down there? What did you see? And all this, on and on and on. And Throne started to talk about seeing apparitions and golden stairwells and, you know, all kinds of weird stuff, you know, humanoids. So he spoke of that paranormal, the paranormal things that they saw, when Fellon said, I don't want you to do that because they're going to think there's something wrong with us. And, you know, so again, Fellon wasn't looking for any kind of notoriety. He didn't want to talk about this. And it was Throne that pretty much, you know, ruined the game plan.
They don't try for any publicity, or he doesn't want to talk about it. I mean, he ends up becoming a bus driver.
Yeah.
It almost feels like it gets lost because this is one of those events that, until I heard your interview with Tim, I never had heard of. And it seems very, yeah, you could say that this stuff might be hallucinations. I mean, you know, with the sensory deprivation aspect of it. But I mean, that's some pretty fantastic, if it is, that's some pretty fantastic hallucinations.
Yeah.
Well, to see all the stuff that they saw. Because even if they see like whole cityscapes and these type of things down while they were down there, and people in weird suits and all kinds of strange things.
Yeah. Now, they had already passed when I was working on the books. I didn't have the opportunity to go and interview him, but I knew a guy from Hazleton, Pennsylvania. He was a businessman, and he worked with Davy Fellon. He had business dealings with Davy Fellon, and he agreed to be interviewed by me as long as he could have his anonymity. So he would ask Davy questions like, what about the cannibalism? And Davy said, you know, no, that didn't happen. What about the ancestors sitting on the stairwells? And he talked about seeing the ancestors. It was almost like a near-death experience type of thing, you know, like the tunnel with the light, the beckoning figure. It was similar to that. So they saw things, and when they were interviewed separately, both talked about the same things. The Skeptical Inquirer had a really big piece on the Sheppton mythology. And I don't want to say it was a hit piece because they talked a lot about Sheppton. They said that my book was the definitive book on the topic, had all kinds of, I mean, it was really long-winded. They had one little piece at the end where they claimed that because of Occam's razor, you know, a medieval means of figuring out if something is, you know, is proper and correct or whatever. They claimed that if you use Occam's razor, which looks for the most simplest explanation in something complex, then it had to be hallucinations or something like this. And I argued the fact that with things of a paranormal or spiritual or supernatural nature, you can't look for a common denominator because it's outside the realm of science. It's something different. So I think that when the Skeptical Inquirer did that piece, I didn't go along with their conclusion. Again, though, they did give us a lot of ink. You know, they wrote about it extensively, and and that was fine. So, but that's okay. When I wrote the Sheppton mythology, what I did was they had an exclusive contract with the Associated Press. For 1 year, the Associated Press would follow them around and do interviews and get into seeing Pope John the 23rd and everything else. So that was pretty well documented. When I wrote the book, what I did was I told their story through their eyes and through their words. I believe that what happened was actually happened, that it was not a hallucination, that it wasn't sensory deprivation, that they were able to go and pull through, with their faith, with the symbiotic relationship between felon and throne, with hope, So again, this is, if all else, you want to discount, at least view Sheppton as a tremendous story of human survival. I mean, under impossible odds, But again, I believe it has a definite paranormal slant to it, and again, validated by scientists like Dr. Bruce Grayson and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and the military psychologists that talked to him. So there were a lot of people that were involved in this, interviewing felon and throne and getting the same narrative. They saw the same thing. So,
Is this probably more well known in Catholic circles around the world, especially people devoted to saints and those kind of practices?
That's a good question, but I don't know. I think it's probably more popular with people that are into the paranormal, because it falls into that thing. And then even when you take a look at Catholics, Catholics are pretty much split. The difference between Catholicism and maybe the Protestant religions, when you talk about communion, Catholics believe that, that you actually experience the body and blood of Christ. Protestants, I believe it's all symbolic. Now, given that, out of all the Roman Catholics in America, there's fewer and fewer Roman Catholics that actually believe that this is the true body and blood of Christ, and a lot of them are believing that this is symbolic. So that's point one. Another point, you're finding an equal number of people that believe in God in this country as do believe in UFOs and the Space Brothers. So, traditional religion as we once know it is no longer as we once knew it. Everything's changing. People, maybe more spiritual than religious, But why not look at the Space Brothers, somebody who's benevolent, smarter than us, wiser than us, somebody who's going to save us from destroying the planet. And not to be a fatalist, but, at some point, the water on Earth evaporates and we start getting choked out. More and more this planet becomes a pressure cooker. And it's not going to be next year or the year after, but after another million or billions of years, this Earth is going to die. It's a dying planet. So, whether your political views on global warming and climate change, whatever they are, it's getting dicier and dicier. And look at the weather. Come on, how's the weather in Nashville and Seattle? Anything atypical?
Well, it's pretty hot here. I don't know about over there.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, you're right. No matter where you come down on that debate, you got to admit that things are getting a little, with the forest fires and
climate
those type of things.
Change wherever.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I want to address a point that you make in the book, and this is something that the third man factor.
Oh yeah.
Or the third man phenomenon. That this is something that is very similar to what these guys experience with seeing the Pope down there in the mine. That this is a very common thing, actually.
Yeah. So when I wrote the book, I said, okay, this seems to be a miracle. Everybody's calling it a miracle. They saw Pope John the 23rd and he saved their lives and he was canonized and all that. So that sort of fit. And then a friend of mine, Jason Bamforth from Philadelphia, he's a paranormal researcher and author. And he said, hey, did you ever hear of the third man factor? John Gigger. And I said, no. So I looked it up, and here, in cases like Sheppton, where they have physical and psychological trauma, a lot of times there is an apparition that is manifested that seems to be there to give these people comfort and guidance. So what is that? What name could you put on it? And so in my chapter in Region Hoodoo, I talked about that. I thought maybe they could be guardian angels, they could be spirit guides, they could just be apparitions we don't know. They could be Jung's collective unconsciousness, a psychological projection of something. But after seeing the third man factor, it sort of opened up that realm. And this is what we do in the paranormal universe, So the possibility that it might be more than just a miracle, that it might be something else than a miracle, that sort of opened up. So in Co-Region Hoodoo, I wrote about that. And but you're correct. We've seen this, or people have seen this in, when they were exploring, Antarctica, and during 9/11, and when Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic, he thought he saw somebody with him. So again, whatever that is, we don't know, but we try to put a name to it. Sort of like, I think all of us are a little bit like J. Allen Hynek. He was able to come up with words like high strangeness to indicate a certain level of significance. Like if you see a light in the sky, maybe that's like low strangeness, but if that light hovers over a car and kills the engine and people are seeing things, that might be it's an example of high strangeness. And then
right.
Hynek, again, with his close encounters of the first, second, and third kind. So he helped us with that definition. And I think that with Giger's third man factor, that's just something else. Just give us vocabulary and terms, give us genres, give us categories to help make sense of all these things that are beyond the scope of science. So that's, I think, what we're all trying to do. That's certainly what I'm trying to do.
You mentioned with the third man factor, like the Shackleton expedition where they're walking through on the snow, on the ice pack.
Yep.
And I think there were 3 of them in this case, and they thought that there was a 4th person with them the entire time. Yeah.
And then the newspaper from, what was it, 1920 maybe, had on the front page, they had a drawing there. Were there 3 or maybe 4, so you had this apparition on the side. So it was kind of cool, but I think we've always seen things like this. We've always heard about it. It's nothing new. What's happening in 2023 was happening back in the 20s and 30s and probably before then. So, we've always seen things and tried to figure out what they are. I'm sure that 100 years ago, there were people just like the 3 of us having a similar conversation about things that they saw up in the sky,
Let's talk about the Smurl haunting. This is one that I've looked into as well. And I understand that you got to interview Ed and Lorraine Warren at one point.
Yeah, they were friends of mine. This was kind of crazy.
Really? Yeah, okay. So you knew them a little better than just interviewing them. Okay.
Yeah, well, we had a relationship. I think we had a friendship. But what happened was there was a place in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, close to Wilkes-Barre, and it was a house that the Smurl family believed was possessed, demonic possession. They heard grunting sounds. They smelled horrible things. Profanities would be etched on the mirrors. The Jack Smurl, the husband, claimed that he was raped by a female demon, a succubus. So what was interesting about all this is that the Catholic Church started to send in priests. They started to send in the local exorcist because they took this seriously. So the church didn't try to cover it up or ignore it. Jack Curran was a local reporter, and he wrote a book called The Haunted, and Ed and Lorraine Warren were co-authors of this. So in 1988, they started the 15-city tour. They were in a place called Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. So I went out there. I wrote a letter to the theater owner, asking permission to interview them. And so I interviewed them, took these really good pictures. They're in the book, but some really great pictures, and hung out with them. And then I would contact them, over the years, asking them questions about demonic possession, about the Smurl haunting, just about things like that. Lorraine had a pet rooster, so you could hear the pet rooster in the background, but they were very nice people. They were very accommodating. They didn't have any kind of attitudes. And Ed and Lorraine Warren, I'm sure your listeners know, they are responsible for the Conjuring franchise. You know, Conjuring, Conjuring 2, Annabelle, Annabelle 1 and 2, all this. And which is the second most successful horror franchise going. I mean, 7 motion pictures, $2 billion. That's 2 with a B. So that was the Conjuring thing. They investigated the Smurl haunting and believed that there was demonic possession involved there. And so that incident was a really big thing back home. And like I said, there was a book written about it. There was a made-for-TV Fox motion picture made about it. And so that did get some exposure. But, in the scheme of things, there are so many places like Amityville and the Hinsdale House, and I'm sure that you have your own spook house in Tennessee and in Washington State. So, but ours was kind of infamous because of the connection with Ed and Lorraine Warren, and and even with the young girl, the Smurl girl, who seemed to come out of a Stephen King novel. Stephen King made a career out of talking about these young women that had psi power, Firestarter and Carrie and all this. So, at one point, the collie was levitated, and with the Smurl house was levitated and thrown across the room. And some researchers felt that maybe that wasn't a demon doing that, maybe the young daughter was doing that, the young Smurl daughter, with the psi power, the angst, the teenage, frustrations and whatever goes into that.
Yeah, that's a pretty leading theory for poltergeist phenomenon, that it's caused by a young person, and most often young female.
Yeah.
That there's the famous case in Britain that I'm
Enfield.
Enfield. Yes, thank you. I knew it started with an E.
Yeah.
That.
And don't ask me how, but I picked it out. So that's
yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting case. I mean, and as I understand it, and I think you write a little bit about this in the book, that they send an exorcist in there. I think they got Bishop McKenna in there in the beginning. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe. And what happened was nobody could really get the job done. Every Roman Catholic diocese has a priest who's schooled in the ancient rite of exorcism. So that's pretty standard. But nobody could get the job done. I mean, the demonic activity continued. So Bishop James Timlin called for help from New York State, and there was I want to get the because there was something I want to read it, but it was Father Alphonse Triebolt, who came down from upstate New York, and this isn't. I'm trying to find something, and it took him 4 times to go and do his exorcism, but he finally was able to go and get it done. So that was interesting. But prior to the Smurl haunting, Father Triebolt was trying to purge another property, and it was up in New York State. And he wasn't able to go and cleanse the house. And I have this in Region Hoodoo, but he said, quote, "Some ground is just bad. No one knows why. So just leave as soon as you can and take only your things with you. Don't discuss your plans inside the house. This place is just a hole to hell." So there's some places that he felt were just pure evil, and that he had no means, no mechanism of, chasing that evil away, or of cleansing that evil. So again, this is a guy that he taught a course, religion and parapsychology. He was an academic, and he was a very active exorcist. And, but the one place in New York State, he wasn't able to go and get the job done. With the Smurl haunting, it took him 4 times. And then, it was resolved. Again, it was controversial, and a lot of people thought, "Oh yeah, the Smurls are making money off this." Well, I don't know how much money. I don't know how much money other authors are making, but this isn't the way to fame and fortune. I'll tell you. I mean, we write because of the love of the craft, but they took their hits, and it's amazing when you come forward, just like in the paranormal, people that would come forward and say, "I saw something, I saw a UFO." And how many of those people are criticized and castigated for hallucinating or not knowing what they saw, or for me being mentally imbalanced? I mean, how many people are reluctant to come forward and tell the world what they saw because of the potential criticism? So,
and ridicule, yeah.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's tough to see things. I mean, I think a lot of us in the paranormal realm are more accepting, because we don't know. I mean, maybe you do see things. I mean, I do these presentations, and people come up to me and tell me about the orbs that they see, or people speaking to them. I mean, okay. I mean, I don't know what it represents, but I'm sure that you're experiencing something that's valid.
Well, we talk about these horror franchises that came out of Ed and Lorraine Warren's real life experiences, but you also talk about in the book how a lot of the modern horror movie itself and its form and the popularity of zombies came out of the Cole region as well, with the Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, last year we went. We did this I talked my wife into this Western Pennsylvania trek. So we went to Kecksburg for the Kecksburg UFO Festival. There was the famous December 1965 crash, and it was Pennsylvania's Roswell. Something crashed in the dead of night. The military came, took it out, put tarps over it, trucked it out, told people to shut up, don't talk about it. You didn't see anything. But the real rub is this, as Shakespeare would say. The real rub is that whenever people like Stan Gordon or other ufologists would go and try to do the research using the Freedom of Information Act, either the information on Kecksburg was redacted, scrubbed out so you couldn't read it, or the pages were missing. So who's zooming who? I mean, somebody's hiding something. And if it was a meteorite, if it was just one of our satellites, if it was a Russian satellite, if it was any of that stuff, why not just say it? Whatever that technology was in 1965, we have surpassed that by light years. So we went to the Kecksburg Festival, UFO Festival, and then we went up to Evans City, which is just north of Pittsburgh, and the mayor, Dink Zinkan, took me and my wife around. He offered to remarry us at the cemetery chapel, but that's where Night of the Living Dead was shot, and it was 1968, black and white. And if you watch the first 10 minutes of that movie, I mean, it's just awesome. I mean, they got it right. They're on a low shoestring budget, but for what they did with the camera angles and the black and white and just the introduction is just a great beginning to a horror movie. And in my book, I claim that art imitates life. And I talk about 3 motion pictures that are Pennsylvania-centric. And I start off with Night of the Living Dead. I go to The Blob, and I talk about the Philadelphia Experiment. And you guys probably know that 2023 is the 80-year anniversary of the Philadelphia Experiment from 1943. So I had a involvement in the Philadelphia Experiment, but the other 2 books, I mean, were significant. I start the book off with a chapter called Night of the Living Dead, and I contend that it wasn't so much a zombie movie. I mean, ostensibly it was, but it was a motion picture that took a look at 1968, which was a horrific year. And we had the Tet Offensive, where every province in South Vietnam was overrun. We had the Pueblo seized by the North Koreans. We had the race riots, the Easter Sunday riots, where about 100 cities were torched. We had Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King assassinated. And then you had the Chicago Convention, where you had the protesters against the National Guard. So, and also Mayor Daley banned Street Fighting Man by the Stones. It was a banned record. You couldn't play it. So I contend that Night of the Living Dead just took a sociological look at the turmoil that was happening in 1968. And I tell people today, and I'll tell your listeners out there, anybody listening to that who feels that the post-pandemic, the post-COVID years were so bad with 2020, 2021, and, even today, with COVID and the political divide, if you think this was bad, you should take a time machine back to 1968 and go through that. I mean, it was a bad year. It was a horrible year, but the good news is that the nation endured. I mean, it didn't tear us apart and fracture us. But 68 was a nasty, nasty year on so many levels. But we made it through that. So we made it to 2023. So, But Night of the Living Dead is just a classic and, pretty much jump-started all of the zombie movies and Walking Dead and all that. So, so it's came from the hills of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, you're definitely right about it, being reflective of the time period that it was made. There was some social commentary in the movie too,
Yeah. Well, they used a black guy as the lead. I mean, who does that in 68?
Right. Yeah.
And then they had
it
the
was
blonde.
A little different for the time, right?
Black guy and a blonde actress. So you had that. So, yeah, just a whole lot of things. But why not? Why not just throw it out there and see how it works, So George Romero was experimenting, I guess, and, innovative, interesting guy.
Yeah, and you just talked about the Kecksburg UFO and wanted to talk a little bit about that. What's your thoughts on the Kecksburg UFO? Do you have any theories as to what it could have been?
Yeah, it could have been one of ours that went down, and it could have been a experimental satellite because it seemed to be controlled. When it came down, it didn't act like a meteorite, and it seemed to be controlled. And it went over Canada and numerous states. So a whole lot of people saw it, but it seemed to be guided and it was maneuvering, and then it finally crashed outside of Kecksburg. And so what it was, I don't know. I mean, could have been one of many things, including a UFO. But the thing that intrigues me more than anything else is why would there be a cover-up? Why would you not allow information about that in 2023. I can't imagine that this information, it's almost like Roswell, and Project Mogul and Skyhook and all that. The government is still withholding information with that. And as you know, there's a lot of disinformation. I mean, they're getting a lot of crazy stuff out there. So they're really blurring the lines. Now, I don't think that happened in Kecksburg, but it certainly happened in Roswell and a lot of other places. So there's some government entities, and who knows? I mean, there's probably entities other than the CIA and FBI that we don't even know about that are putting information out there or feeding that to UFO researchers. So I don't know. It's a bit of a mess. It's a convoluted mess out there, and it's hard to go and find out, what the truth is and what the disinformation is. But I think whoever it is, divide and conquer. Keep the masses confused. And in our realm, I think that's what they're trying to do with us. So I don't know. I don't know what came down in December of '65, but it was something, and it wasn't a meteor, and I think it was controlled. So I don't know.
I've heard several different things. I mean, one of the things, of course, everybody, a lot of people love the theory that it was that Nazi Bell thing.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, you do mention that in the book because it's got that, it's got that acorn type of shape, and it was shaped very similar to what, I don't even know where the whole Nazi Bell thing even came from. But so a lot of people have written about that. I've heard that it was a broken arrow. In other words, like a nuclear weapon that got lost and didn't explode, thankfully. Mm-hmm. Which that has actually, I don't know if that's happened a few times. I don't know why they would cover that up unless it was something really top secret.
Mm-hmm.
The one interesting one that you write about in the book was it was like Soviet space probe.
Right. Yeah. And some people thought it was that. Again, if it was, why not fess up? I mean, what's the problem?
Yeah.
I mean, it's ours. I mean, we're not giving it back. So, so I don't know. It's just weird. But the other thing too is, it's just like UFOs and Bigfoot. This physical structure, this physical reality. If it was that Nazi bell, maybe there was time travel involved. Maybe there was another dimension or parallel universe. So, researchers are talking more about that. And this is driven by Albert Einstein, his wormhole theory that, there's black holes, there's conduits from one area of the space-time continuum to another. So, scientists, astronomers are trying to figure out how civilizations could get from their planet to here when it would take us like 26, 36 years to get there. I mean, it's a long, long way. It's just impossible to get there. But with Einstein's wormhole theory, then you could just bridge that gap in seconds. So again, this seems to be the predominant theory with UFOs for some people, and also Bigfoot, that maybe they're shape-shifting between dimensions, between parallel worlds. Again, we don't know. All we have are the theories. So,
and I think you met Stan Gordon, correct? Like
I did.
You met him, yeah. Like he's in that. I guess the western part of the state.
Yeah.
And what's that famous case? The ridge that is a really high, like with Bigfoot encounter, but it's really strange, really odd.
Yeah, I talk about Chestnut Ridge in Region Hoodoo. Yeah. So Chestnut Ridge is this area, about 100-mile area stretch from southeast of Pittsburgh, goes down to West Virginia. It takes in about 4 or 5 counties, but this is where we see the majority of Bigfoot sightings and also Bigfoot and UFO sightings together. And when I first heard this, I thought this is crazy. I mean, I didn't believe it at all. But the more I read about it and saw this is pretty prevalent, and I think it indicates that maybe Bigfoot is more than just a physical reality. Maybe there's this paranormal aspect as well that, the UFO sightings bring to it. So I don't know. But I mean, things just got, again, to make my point, things just got more convoluted and confused. With all that. But Stan Gordon's the one that documents all this stuff. Whenever the people call out in Western Pennsylvania, call the state police with a UFO or Bigfoot sightings, they say, call Stan, so they call Stan Gordon and he writes it down. So.
Well, I know you're familiar with Tim Renner's, work. I know you're familiar with his book, Where the Footprints End, and
yep.
His book along with Joshua Cutchin. I mean, I think they've done pretty much the definitive examination of just how weird the Bigfoot phenomenon can be.
Yeah. And he talks about the wild men. I mean, people like in the 1800s would see these wild men, these primitive guys, and, just maybe they were Bigfoot that they were saying. Maybe they were just misidentifying them, But Tim did an awesome job. He got a book called Bigfoot in Pennsylvania. Tim and I were on the same stage a couple of weeks ago. We were in York County, Pennsylvania, and that was just great to hang out with him. And so I gave my talk, and then he gave his, but it was really nice. And so I've been on Strange Familiars a number of times. So he's a good guy.
That's where we first heard you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about Centralia. I mean, that's an interesting place in and of itself. Not necessarily paranormal, but I mean, it is kind of weird.
Yeah. So Sheppton and Centralia are pretty close to where I live. Kecksburg and Chestnut Ridge are on the other side, like maybe 5 hours away from where I am. But Centralia is really close. And around 1962, 63, the founding fathers of Centralia were going to have a festival, and they decided to take all the trash and throw it in the coal mine and let it burn out. And what happened was it sparked and it started a fire, and that fire continues to this day. Now, what happened was this fire was raging underneath Centralia. The road, it was Route 61, buckled. There was steam coming out, and it was just crazy. I mean, the road was like a roller coaster. So eventually the state moved in, and with eminent domain, they started to buy up all these properties. They relocated people. Today, there's maybe 5 homes, I believe, that still exist in Centralia, plus one church, one Ukrainian church. They had a place called Graffiti Highway, where all the kids would come and tag it. And then the state came, and Centralia was the 6th most visited tourist place in Pennsylvania because of Graffiti Highway. So anyway, the state decided to cover that up with dirt. So there's, 1 million tons of dirt there. So you can't see the Graffiti Highway. But the interesting thing about Centralia took place, I think it was in the 1800s. And there was a Irish Catholic priest that was beat up by the Molly Maguires. And he was calling out these Mollies for some of the bad stuff they were doing. So he gets beat up, and he got upset, and he put a curse on Centralia. He said, at the end of the day, the only thing left standing will be the St. Ignatius Church. So that was his curse. And lo and behold, that Centralia fire is still raging, since 1963. So they made the movie Silent Hill based on Centralia. So it has its infamy, but I would say, yeah, there's something paranormal going on there. I mean, I don't know. I mean, something really weird, but I remember driving through Centralia countless times, seeing the steam and all that.
Yeah.
Dean R. Koontz wrote a book about that, talking about.
Yeah, it's constantly on fire.
It is,
they're never, well, just like anthracite coal, and it's never gonna, I mean, it might eventually burn out, but it might be a very, very long time. I mean, it's been going on for, when was that? 1962?
62,
was when that happened?
Yeah.
So you're talking about,
and we're doing our part.
Years.
We're doing our part for global warming. So that's
right. I mean, it's an ecological disaster. I mean, really, truly.
It really is. Yeah, it is. And then there's the conspiracy theorists think that there's so much rich coal underneath there that the state or somebody wants to keep it for themselves. Well, that's not going to happen. They're not going to mine that. I mean, the coal mining industry is over with. They have some like open mining, but strip mining, but they're never going back down there to get that. It's that's like yesterday's news. It's not going to happen.
What was the reasoning of covering up the graffiti? Why did they do that?
Well, I think because they were sort of ignorant. They weren't visionaries. I personally wrote a letter to Representative David Millard, who was in charge of the Pennsylvania Tourism Board. And I said, why don't you open up Centralia, have Jeeps, whatever, charge people to go back there and check it out. I mean, a deserted town, you could ride those roads and, see what's left there, which isn't much. I mean, that would have been great. And,
they do that with Chernobyl, they have like Chernobyl tourists,
Well, we don't, in order for anything to happen, you have to have somebody who's a visionary, somebody who has some kind of motivation. You need that. And evidently we just don't have that here. So, don't let that word get out, But I did my part to reach out to Dave Millard, and couldn't make it happen. So too bad. But anyway, there used to be tons of college kids there. It was a mecca. I mean, they always went there. But now you see very few people. So
could it have been maybe because they didn't want people going there because aren't the fumes toxic? I mean, isn't that like maybe? But people still live there.
Yeah. People still live there. Yeah, and the fumes are
which
toxic.
Blows my mind.
Yeah. Well, it's the anti-authoritarian thing, I'm going to do what I want to do, and it's like if you smoke, you're going to die. Well, you got to die of something. So
Well, I mean, it and on the obverse side, they told people not to leave 3 Mile Island whenever that happened.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, it's kind of an interesting dichotomy there.
Yeah. That was so the Pennsylvania has a weird paranormal history. And one thing I want to do, the hex signs, and Lancaster has been well documented, the white witches, all that stuff, but not the rest of the state. So I thought with Coal Region Hoodoo, I wanted to go and do that and give the coal region in northeastern Pennsylvania and western Pennsylvania its due. So, so that was the purpose of the book. And, chapters on Bigfoot and UFOs, Kecksburg, white witches. I have a chapter on Dr. Frederick Santee, who was a high priest for the Coven of the Kata, and it was a Wicca craft. And I've had numerous practitioners reach out to me and thank me for writing that chapter. They said that I was respectful of the craft, which I was really, really honored to hear that. So.
Yeah, and you got to interview him several times,
Yeah.
I think you said. And I this is someone also that I think that I'd heard of the Coven of the Kata, but he was like a child prodigy.
Yeah. Great. I think it was the youngest to graduate from Harvard when he was 14. Yeah, Sybil Leek initiated the Coven there in Walpole. Yeah. It's right down the road from me. But I interviewed him numerous times. I was his patient. I was there at his funeral. I was talking to David McCullum. That was his publicist. And we were just hanging out and just chatting, and he was telling me all these stories. So Santee was brilliant. He would go to New York City and buy these books. And what happened was he had these occult literature. He had one of the best collections of occult literature going. Supposedly the books he had were in better condition than the books at the University of Chicago Library. And some people knew this. And he had a book house, and they would go and torch parts of his house and then rip off these documents, these books that were worth a lot of money. So I think Fraser's Golden Bough might have been one of them. But, interesting stuff. It's sad, but he was a kind gentleman. Was able to tape record him. And I remember, I guess it was last year, a friend of mine came over and wanted to hear the tape. So listen, I played the tape for the first time in decades, and it was interesting just to hear his voice again. To be there. Fred Santee, Dr. Frederick Santee. He was a physician. His dad was a physician, and his grandfather was a physician. And they were kind and altruistic. They many times would treat people either free or maybe for a quarter. They were physicians, and they were open all night, so they were pretty amazing people. 5 miles down the road from where I live now. So,
do you think that there's something particular about this region that lends to all this weirdness around it, or is this just the insight you've gained by living there?
No, I can't. No, thank you. If that's a compliment, I'll take it. But no, I just think that there's a lot of weirdness there, like Hynek talked about, high strangeness. There's just a whole lot of levels of high strangeness there in, sort of like in one place. Sheppton's a good example of that. Think about that. Out-of-body experience, near-death experience, afterlife experiences, humanoid apparitions, the miracle of Pope John the 23rd, relatives sitting on golden cities. All of that. Just too much stuff happening, just bizarre. So I don't know. One or two things might be a coincidence, but when you start counting them on both hands, you got to think that there's something going on here. I don't know what it is. They talk about that in Gettysburg. All the people that have died, that there's ghosts and hauntings in Gettysburg. They talk about that in New England. Well, Tennessee and Washington State have as many old houses, mansions that could be haunted. You tell me this thing about New England, having a monopoly on anything paranormal or weird. But, I have been able to go and collect this, but what's interesting is that when you connect the dots, you see that there's a lot of activity happening here in this region. So I'll give you another one. The guy that kicked off the Men in Black thing, Alfred Bender from Duryea.
Albert Bender. Yep.
Albert Bender, Duryea, Pennsylvania. 30 minutes away from where I live. So, the Men in Black. So
yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting. coincidence that you mentioned that. I was going to ask you about that, but I've been
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
writing about Bender today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or if another one, if I may, Carl Allen from New Kensington, Pennsylvania. I mean, he
Uh-huh.
mucked up the Philadelphia experiment big time. Sent annotated versions of Dr. Morris Jessup's book to the
Hmm.
Navy Department of whatever, and to Morris Jessup, and claimed that he had seen things. And another Pennsylvania boy, mucking it up. So that's. And another one too, Richard Sharp Shaver, born in Berwick, Pennsylvania, my hometown. He was
Oh, yeah.
investigated by the FBI for conjuring this UFO craze, the UFO craze, the hysteria. So, Richard
Well,
Sharp.
the
In the water.
Sheppton stuff. I mean, the Sheppton stuff really, like it matches with some of the things that Shaver claimed,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
right.
The subterranean world and these type of things that he said that he saw with the Taros and the Daros. And,
Yeah,
I mean, Shaver is I mean, he's a real interesting character that I really feel in many ways really started the whole UFO mythology in a lot
yeah,
of
yeah,
ways.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
it
think you're
really
right. Yeah,
did.
yeah,
And
and
I mean, Carl Allen too. I mean,
yeah,
and Bender. I mean, Bender. He starts the Men in Black mythology.
yeah,
It all comes from Bender and what he was
yeah,
doing.
yeah. And then Gray Barker.
Gray Barker,
And
right?
I think John Keel. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I view myself a little bit like maybe John Keel. I mean, I'd like to, I have a couple other paranormal books in mind, but, I think I want to go and write my own narrative, my own ideas and beliefs, and just go on that and have my own theories. So, I want to be a part of this, and but I want to make sense of it. So that's, if I could do that, if I could contribute something of value, then I want to do that. So.
What's your thoughts on the Philadelphia experiment? What do you think that really was?
Well, we know that there was a technique called degaussing, and during World War II, these Allied ships would be going across the Atlantic, and the magnetic signature would trigger these German bombs, these Nazi bombs, and that would explode the ships. So in Canada, they invented this degaussing thing. Gauss is a measure of magnetism, with the ship. So they would wrap these ships in coils, and then they would electrify them, and that would go and negate that magnetic signature. So that was actually happening during World War II. And the Philadelphia experiment took place in 1943. As I understand it, I believe that they were experimenting with degaussing, and I think in 43 they probably juiced it more than they should have, and something happened. Now, what happened? Well, the mythology said that the Eldridge, the destroyer, was teleported from Philadelphia to Norfolk and back. The mythology claims that several people died, and if you saw the motion picture, it was horrific, and I think that's in a lot of people's minds. The two guys that are just like have melted into the steel bulkhead of the ship. They're just trapped there in agonized pain. So the mythology is that something really disastrous happened, that men went crazy, and all that, and then there was the usual cover up. So I think something happened. And yes, there was a cover-up, but we don't know what it was. I think something happened. Maybe people did die. I'm not convinced that they were teleported anyplace. The rub with this, though, is Fred Tracy. He was a friend of mine. He lived in Derry, New Hampshire. And my cousin Jim was a Vietnam medic, and he was living up in Derry and knew Fred. So he put me in touch with Fred. And I went up there to interview him, and Fred claimed that he was on the USS Antietam, an aircraft carrier, that they did similar degaussing experiments with them, and bad things happened to the men. He claimed that Forrestal, Admiral Forrestal, who is connected to MJ-12 and later committed suicide, remember, jumped off of from his hospital.
First Secretary of Defense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Fred Tracy said that Forrestal had written something about the Philadelphia experiment, and he admitted that it was true, and Fred Tracy heard this thing. So I write about Fred Tracy. I mean, he's my contact. And again, it's just his word, but he was talking about the Philadelphia experiment and his experience with that. So that's in the book. And like I said, the Night of the Living Dead, the Blob, and Philadelphia Experiment are all three, I guess, Pennsylvania-centric films that play a big part in my book because, I think that they deserve to be there.
Yeah, Philadelphia Experiment, that whole thing, and then when you put the whole Montauk stuff in there.
Yeah, there you go, yeah.
Val Bielek, it's a rabbit hole, man. It's never-ending entertainment.
I know, yeah. Where'd Al come from? Boy,
Yeah. Well, Al watched the movie and that.
No.
I mean, he basically gave the plot of the movie. But I mean, Carl Allen too. I mean, it just in all the mystery with Jessup and all that, all of that material is super fascinating. If you ever get a chance, there's a podcast called The Saucer Life. Aaron Gullius, he did like a 3-episode thing about the Philadelphia experiment and Montauk that's super interesting and pretty comprehensive.
Yeah.
So if you ever get a chance to listen to that, I highly recommend it.
Saucer Life. I'll look it up. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we covered most of the book. We enjoyed the book, and it's a nice compilation of these different writings, all with some kind of tie-in to the coal region.
Yeah, and Pennsylvania, yeah, and also the world beyond. I mean, it's So if anybody's interested in the book, you certainly can buy it on Amazon. That's called Region Hoodoo: Paranormal Tales from Inside the Pit. Or if you'd like an autographed copy, free shipping. Here's the pitch. You could send it to www.maximfurek.com. That's MAXIMFUREK.com, and I'd love to personally autograph a copy for you. So, so thank you. Thanks for this opportunity. It's been a great interview. And
Thank you.
You guys know your stuff. I'll say that.
Thank you. Is your book about Sheppton, is it also available? Your other books available on your site or Amazon?
Both, on my site and on Amazon. Correct. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So we were talking a little bit beforehand, but what is next for you? And you're actually working on another book right now. So
yeah, it's a flying saucer book, and I'm just immersing myself in flying saucer literature. I mean, everything I could get my hands on. The scientists, the contactees, the abductees, hoaxers, the whole thing. And it's called Flying Saucer Esoteric, a comprehensive listing of history's most fantastic UFO events. And I choose to use the word flying saucer and UFO rather than UAP. So that's that.
Old
but
school.
Anyway, yeah. So I'm excited. I think it's going to resonate. And what I want to do is I want to introduce to the UFO community a little bit more about planetary exploration and astrophysicist and some other things. So I think I have a unique approach. I'm hoping that I think it's going to go over, and I'm hoping that Beyond the Fray will pick this one up and publish it. So
yeah.
So
that's what I was about to ask.
And I hope that it's going to be published in 2023. So I'm close to finalizing it.
Yeah. Well, when it's ready, we will definitely. I think we'll have you back on the show.
Love to do that. Yeah. Okay, we'll talk flying saucers. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, always. I mean, I'm down for any flying saucer talk.
Okay. Cool.
All right. So I want to thank Maxim Furek for coming on.
Thanks for coming on, and anyone who wants to check out our Patreon is available at patreon.com/Conspirinormal.
Also, Strange Realities Conference coming at you November 3rd through the 5th. We're getting pretty close. Tickets are available. I will have that linked up to on the show notes for you guys to get tickets, and also promoting everything Strange Realities. Also, Nevaeh's Nightmare. Go check that out on YouTube. We'll be doing something this month. I'm going to talk to Serfiel here pretty soon about what that's going to be. I want to thank everybody for listening, and we will be back next week on Conspirinormal.